Welcome, friends, to the Connected Mom podcast. We are in the middle of a book club season, and the book that we are going through is Cultivating Deeper Connections in a Lonely World. Just yesterday, I was hearing about some who were feeling lonely, overlooked, ignored. And those feelings are never great for us. And today, we are in the chapter about not taking offense and forgiving one another. Paul wrote that we are to forgive one another in Colossians 3:18. And this is necessary in any relationship. You probably know this. C.S. Lewis said to love at all is to make ourselves vulnerable. You know, I remember when I was a teenager and I was being mentored by a campus ministry director. And one day she took me for a long walk and she said, you know, Becky, God has given you, he's gifted you a very sensitive nature. You're very sensitive to him and to others, and that's a blessing. However, it can be a downfall when you take offense. If you become easily offended, it's going to inhibit your ministry later in life. You know, I never forgot her words. Taking offense is something that we all do at different times. And yet the best illustration that I've ever heard about taking offense is that it's like we take the bait of Satan. And once we take that bait, we're trapped. It's kind of like if you ever put a mouse trap in your garage and, you know, you put a little cheese at one end, and then when the mouse gets there, it snaps shut and the mouse is trapped, and you get rid of that rodent, which I'm not a huge fan of mice, so that sounds great to me. However, in your life and mine, Satan loves to bait us with getting our feelings hurt and with taking offense. You know, maybe for you, that means you feel disrespected in a certain relationship, or you feel overlooked or ignored. You know, maybe you've been attending your church for years, but nobody knows your name and you feel like you're not seen and you're not heard. Maybe for you, you've become offended because somebody made a casual remark years ago and you never forgot it. You kind of hung on to it. Or maybe they corrected your child and you felt defensive of your child. And so you took offense. And when we take offense, we not only take Satan's bait in our lives, but it's like we kind of build a monument to our own pain. Years ago, I had the privilege of speaking in Estonia. And when I was there, when I was done speaking, a tour guide gave us a whole tour of the city of Tallinn. And I'll never forget it because there was one part of the city where there was a huge monument and a bunch of rocks on the ground, and it was fenced off. And I said, what is this monument to? And our tour guide said, that is where the Russians first bombed Estonia. And we have vowed to never forget. You know, in your life and mine, a lot of times we become offended. You know, maybe it's by something a friend said, or somebody in our church said or didn't say, or maybe we've become offended by our spouse, some comment that they made years ago, or by one of our adult kids. And we've clung to that offense. And not only have we clung to it, but we've built a monument to our own pain. And we have made an internal vow that we will never forget. Here's the thing. That monument to your own pain is not helping your relationship. In fact, it's hurting it. Because if you claim to follow Jesus, Jesus calls us to continually and consistently offer grace and forgiveness to others. So what do we do if we find ourselves becoming easily offended? You know, I have learned in my life that I need to ask myself a few questions when I take offense or when I get my feelings hurt. One of the first questions I ask myself is, how is hanging on to my hurt helping me? Because a lot of times, 99.9% of the time, maybe even 100%, it's not helping me. We are all going to be offended at one time or another because just like we quoted earlier in this program, C.S. Lewis said, to love is to make yourself vulnerable. So if you love others, you are going to be offended. But the first question you need to ask when you take offense, when you become hurt by something somebody has done or has not done, is how is it helping me to dwell on this? Because chances are it's not. The second question that I like to ask myself is, what can I take responsibility for in this hurt feelings that I have? Maybe for me, if I'm feeling overlooked, well, maybe I haven't introduced myself to others in the room. Or if I feel undervalued, maybe others in the room don't know what I can actually bring to the table. So I need to look at what can I take offense, what can I take responsibility for? Maybe for you, you feel like other people have taken advantage of you. They've used you and misused you. There you might need to ask yourself the question, have I set clear boundaries? And have I made my boundaries clear to others? Am I embracing my own limits, or am I allowing myself to be pulled into things that I shouldn't be pulled into? That's what you can take responsibility for. When you decide what you can take responsibility for, the next question to ask yourself is, how do I need to change to move forward? If I don't want to feel undervalued in relationship, I need to consider, how am I bringing value to this relationship? How am I affirming others? How am I encouraging them? How am I praying for them? If I'm not doing any of those things, I'm going to feel undervalued in that relationship. So moving forward, that means I need to change. Maybe if you have felt taken advantage of, you need to consider moving forward, what limits do I need to embrace so that I feel like others are actually respecting my boundaries? Those are good questions. The next question I love to ask myself when I've taken offense or I've had my feelings hurt is, how important is this relationship to me? You see, if I really value the relationship, if it's precious to me, there are going to be things I'm going to willingly overlook. I value the relationship with my dearest friends. So if they're having an off day and they make an off the cuff or comment, or they point out a weakness in my character, that relationship is so important to me that I'm going to be willing to overlook that and say, you know what? They're just having a bad day or they're having an off day. And I'm not going to allow myself the freedom to take offense here. Instead, I'm going to give myself the freedom to overlook this offense and to move on in this relationship. The same principle holds true in my marriage. Steve is a wonderful husband and I love him dearly. There are days where, like your husband or your wife, he has an off day and he might make a flippant comment. The relationship is precious to me. I'm going to be willing to offer grace and forgiveness. I'm not going to hang on to that comment. Why? Because the relationship is so important to me. It's good to ask yourself, how important is this relationship to me? Is this worth going to the wall for and to upsetting the cart? Maybe it is. There are some issues that are certainly worth going to the wall for and to raising and to having a good conversation about. But not every time you get your feelings hurt. Sometimes when you get your feelings hurt, you just need to say, you know what? This is just a small thing and I can overlook it and I can move on because the relationship is important to me. And then the last and final question I like to ask myself, and this one I really sit with the Holy Spirit, is, how do I want to show up in this relationship? How do I want to show up as a friend? How do I want to show up as a ministry leader? How do I want to show up as a spouse? How do I want to show up as a mother? How do I want to show up as a mentor? Because how I want to show up is going to drastically dictate whether or not I take offense over small things. You see, if I want to show up as a mentor, as somebody who has wisdom and godliness, I'm not going to take offense over small things. If I want to show up as a mother who is loving and gracious to her adult kids, I'm going to offer grace with my life. I'm not going to easily take offense. I'm going to want to show up as the one in the relationship who loves unconditionally, who serves willingly, who sets and models clear boundaries, and who exemplifies the heart of Jesus Christ to my adult kids. You know, all of these questions really are helpful when you are thinking about getting your feelings hurt, or when you've already gotten your feelings hurt. You know, here's the thing, friends, we're all going to get our feelings hurt. At some point or another, you're going to be overlooked in your life. You're going to be undervalued in your life. You're going to have your feelings hurt over this, that, or the other thing. What you do with that in that moment is really up to you. Getting your feelings hurt is not a sin. It's what you do with it moving forward. Do you offer grace and forgiveness? Do you not build the monument to your own pain? Are you willing to move forward to continue loving? Those are some good questions to ask yourself. Hey, if you're doing this study as a group, I want you to talk as a group about when have you recently had your feelings hurt? And how did you choose to move forward after that? How do we continually offer forgiveness and grace to one another because we claim to follow Jesus? If you want to cultivate deeper connections in your life, offering forgiveness is key. Hey, thanks for joining me today on the Connected Mom podcast. And I hope this session was helpful for you. I would love to hear from you. So please feel free to drop me an email at becky@beckyharling.com. I would love to hear how you're choosing to forgive one another in your relationships. Goodbye for now. And next week, we're going to be looking in our book study at our final week, how to cultivate deep prayer partners. So I hope you'll join us. Thanks for joining us today.